Hey everybody, today's going to be a little different format of a video. I decided to do a full brew day. It's going to be a long video, but hopefully some people can gain some insight to just a little different parts of the low oxygen brewing process. Today I'm making a Bavarian Helles, which is a great beer. Deceptively difficult and nowhere to hide. And I'm also doing a decoction. So right now I'm pouring out 3.5 pounds of grain into a separate brew bag. And the way I'm going to try to keep the oxygen ingress to a minimum is to just be transporting all the grain inside the brew bags. While decoction is definitely not a low oxygen approach, I'm looking to mainly just gain some flavor. And it's pretty new practice for me, so we'll just go through it together. Here's my false bottom that I put inside the anvil foundry that I use for my mash tun. Trying to find my little mark etched in the side just to know where it goes. This is going to be a little bit of a long video, so skip around. Hopefully it gives you a little perspective. And hope it helps. Right now I'm bringing the strike water up to temperature. And that strike water is YOS water, yeast oxygen scavenging. Right here I'm putting in the grate in my kettle, and this is where I'm going to put the decoction. Put the bag in there, and it's going to sit on that grate, so the heat coming off the induction burner doesn't do any damage to the bag or the grain. I cut a little bit out of the grate to make way for the little rotating arm I have in my kettle. So back to the strike water. So I've put yeast in the night before, and the yeast with a little bit of sugar scavenges all the oxygen out of the strike water. The other alternative would be to boil the strike water, but this is just a little easier approach because you don't have to cool it. You just bring it up to your dough in temperature. You can see it's milky, cloudy. It does have the yeast, but I can assure you that has no impact on the mash or any of the final clarity of the beer. So right now I'm just stirring to make sure the temperature is evenly spread out through the liquid so I can trust my thermometer reading. And right now I'm just going to run some of the water out of it because it sits in the tube, and I don't have any way to know if it's deoxygenated. And plus I just want to lower my volume just a little bit because I added some for my decoction water, which we'll go over in a little bit. So, but this is an important step because you want to have some flow or new liquid in your tubing to make sure there isn't any oxygen in the tubing. Basically, if the strike water is there, then the oxygen is not. I'm hooking this up to the kettle. For my decoction, the way I'm doing it today, I'm going to put some water in the brewing kettle, and when I do transfer the decoction over, it's going to be in the brew bag. So I'm trying to keep all of the mash enzymes in the mash. So there'll be some liquid that comes over, but mainly I'm just going to be moving the grain. But because of this grate, I need to have some liquid up and touching the grain. I've added a little bit of extra liquid to my strike water because you do get a little higher efficiency when you do the decoction, and plus you have some more boiling losses. So I usually start with about 8 1/4 gallons, and I think I put 9 gallons in last night, and then I just ran off probably a 1/4 of a gallon into that stainless steel cappuccino thing. Now I'm hooking up the tubing to my mash tun, which in low oxygen brewing we do what we call an underlet. That means we're going to put the grain in the mash tun before we run the water to the grain, and that water is slowly brought in from the bottom, and this creates a really slow initial reaction between the water and the grain. We're going to do a little bit of last minute water additions. First, this is a little bit of lactic acid. I think I put 2 milliliters in. And next is going to be my sulfites. This is sodium metabisulfite. And we're going to sprinkle that in, give it a stir. Pretty sure this is 1.3 grams that I use for this 5-gallon batch of beer. And the sulfites are going to play a major role when we bring the strike water in and it first touches the grain. The sulfites are going to minimize the oxygen reactions and hopefully retain all of our malt flavor that we're looking for. So I'm gently stirring this around just to make sure the sulfites are distributed through the water while I'm watching my temperature. I don't want to overshoot. So the basis of this decoction is I'm going to dough in. We're going to do about a 15-minute low beta rest with the entire grain bed, and then I'm going to remove about a third of it and bring it over to the boil kettle. I will do 15-minute alpha rest in the boil kettle with the 1/3 grain. Then I'm going to bring it up to a boil and do the boil for about 15 minutes, and then we will bring it back to the main mash. Then we'll bring up the main mash to its own alpha rest, or some people refer to it as a glycoprotein rest. And then we'll do a mash out, and then off to the boil kettle. Here you can see my mash cap. We'll hook that up in a second. Alright, so I have all the milled grain milled it into the bucket and also into the brew bag. So I'm just going to place the brew bag in the mash tun. Remember, the water is going to come from the bottom. All right, so we are at temperature. So this underletting process is a really important part of the brew day for low oxygen brewing. Before I get into that, this is my second bag, which has the decoction grain in it. All right, so it's just going to sit inside the other bag, so it's going to be nice and easy to just pick up and remove. But since they're all in there, it will also participate in the first beta rest. All right, so back to the dough in. So this is going to be a very long dough in comparison to a normal homebrew approach. Slow, slow, slow is your best approach here. For low oxygen brewing, you want to give time for the reactions to take place, not overload. So the slower we can bring the water in, the more chance the sulfites have a shot at winning the battle, so to speak. And granted, this is a pretty long one I did today. I kind of wanted to overemphasize how slow it is, but you'll see it's about 20 minutes, which is pretty long. I mean, I know it's long, and some people are going to watch this and think it's overkill, but it is what it is. So I'm going to move a camera over there just to show you the rate that I watch the sight glass go down. The speed is rather slow, but it is better in the end. And after you do it for a while, it's just part of your brew day. Here's the sight glass. You can see the speed that the water is going down. It's rather predictable, so once you start it, you don't really have to do anything else. You just can do other things around the house or brew house until it's ready to go. Okay, well that's going in. I'm going to set up my recirculation, and this is going to go through my mash cap. So first I'm just going to hook up the tubing that comes from the pump. And the concept for this is the mash cap is going to float on the mash water and bring the recirc wort through the mash cap and then gently distribute it underneath the water line as to not create any kind of bubbling action or anything that would introduce more oxygen. So you can see the first bits of strike water coming up to the top there. I'm going to turn the mash tun on a little bit. So what I usually do is wait for all the strike water to get in the tun before I do a single stir. And usually I can get by with just stirring once at the very beginning of the mash, and the rest of the mash is just recirculation until it goes over to the boil kettle. A common thought or question is what's the difference of an underlet as opposed to slowly dropping a brew bag down into strike water? And while you can make a valiant effort with this slowly lowering of the bag, in people's testing, it just never comes close to actually doing the very slow underlet. And I have another video on my YouTube channel where I compared 4 batches, and a couple of them were normal brew in the bag approaches. And no doubt you can improve a normal just dump the grain in approach. Everything is to a varying degree, and this is the optimal approach, which is undilating with sulfided water very slowly. But everybody brews differently, so you can experiment, and I thought in making this video it's important to show you the optimal approach. And sometimes patience is part of brewing, and this is one area that it's best to be patient. Okay, we're just about finished with the dough in. Last little bits of the strike water just drained out of the hot liquor tank. Alright, closed all the valves. Alright, so we're going to just do a little stir here to make sure the grain is distributed well. Trying to be careful. Don't want to splash too much, but I mean, obviously you got to have some movement, so you're going to create some air pockets. This early stir is important to remove any trapped air pockets in the bottom of your grain bed. So I'm just stirring around the decoction bag, as I'll refer to it. Now I'm going to place the decoction bag in place, and I'll do a little stir for its grain. Okay, so we're finished with the stirring. I'm just going to put my mash cap in place. For this first 15 minutes, I'm not going to start any kind of recirculation. I'm just going to let the grain bed sit in the temperature that the strike water came in at. We'll set the timer for 15 minutes, and after that, we will pick up the decoction bag and we'll move it to the other kettle. I'm just draining the water out of the hot liquor tank, and because I use the YOS yeast oxygen scavenging method, there's definitely yeast residual in the hot liquor tank. Before I clean that up, I'm going to hook my recirculation pump to the mash tun outlet. So I'm going to clean out the hot liquor tank and put about 5 gallons of water in there, which I will heat up and use to clean the mash tun with some PBW after the mash has been lautered away, and just prepare it to do the next thing, which I use my chiller water in the mash tun. the YOS is just loose in there, so just rinse basically the loose yeast cells out of there. Nothing crazy of the cleaning level, just kind of spraying it away. All right, we're going to jump ahead in time here. And it looks like the 15-minute beta rest is complete. So we're going to go ahead and start the decoction process. Take the mash cap off and just store it out of the way a little bit. So I'm going to lift this bag out slowly, basically as slow as I can. Try to leave as much wort behind in the mash tun as possible. That was graceful. As I do these more often, I'll probably speed up that process. All right, so I'm going to put the mash cap back on the mash, and it's going to continue. We're going to start the recirculation first, though. I have my pump controller up there on the wall. Allows me to slow the pump speed down. That way the impeller's not going at 100% while the recirculation's going and basically beating up your wort through the entire mash. Got to open up my clamp there. Oh, now it flows. Okay. Just get a medium to slow flow through the recirc. Just dialing it in there. Put the cap in place, and we'll put the lid back on, and that will just percolate down to beta temperatures. All right, over to the kettle. So what I'm going to do now is bring this up to about 160 degrees, and we're going to perform an alpha rest. I'm just trying to distribute the liquid around the grain a little bit. Trying to go for a fairly dry consistency. Trying to emulate a decoction mash that is just in a pot as closely as possible. As I do more of these into the future, I'll probably already heat the water before I even transfer the bag over a little more. Today when I turned the water on, I think it was 110 degrees. So it had a pretty good distance to go up, so I think I could be more efficient by getting that water up to like 165 or something before I even bring the grain over. My goal in performing the decoction mash this way is to make it as easy and painless as possible. And also rather quick. You know, I don't want to have a full 12-hour brew day. I don't know if anybody really does want that. Okay, so we are at temperature, so I'm going to put that kettle's mash cap in place. Put the lid on, and that's going to sit for 15 minutes. Just wanted to show you the amount of flow I'm getting in the recirculation. Lift the mash cap up here. There we go. We can see it's not a trickle, but it's definitely not very strong. It's just something to get some movement and distribute the temperature around a little bit because the heat source is at the bottom. And it brings the heated wort up to the top and lets it flow through the grain bed. Here's my controller. So that turns the pump from 0 to 100% electronically. And I believe that's a much better way than using any kind of ball valve to restrict flow due to the slower speed of the impeller, and it just is a lot easier on your wort. Okay, what I'm going to do now is check my gravity in the main mash. I have been trying to change the way I brew. I've been taught recently that it's more important to measure the amount of conversion as you go rather than just straight mash times. So I'm trying to make a new habit of taking refractometer readings throughout the mash and to not move on to the next step until certain targets are met. one of the, I guess, basic targets people have is 90% in your beta step. So you would hold the beta step until you reach 90% of your target of your pre-boil gravity. But I am noticing my refractometer, which is fairly old model. I don't know how much I trust the ATC, the automatic temperature control or calibration or offset, or however it's termed. I don't think I'm getting completely true readings, so I need to look into this. Maybe get a different refractometer. I made this little piece of stainless steel. I can just stick down the edge and get a few drops, which is convenient. Okay, so the 15-minute alpha rest for the decoction is complete. Now we're going to ramp it up to boiling, so we actually do the decoction. I took the mash cap out, but I wound up putting it back in, as you'll see in the video, and as I go forward, I'm just going to leave the mash cap in place from that alpha rest. I've noticed that because I'm boiling with the bag in place, there tends to be a little bit of an air pocket, and having that mash cap in place kind of just presses everything down on the grain. And hopefully you'll be able to see some of that in the overhead video here. Just taking another refractometer reading. If I remember correctly, that day the first reading was, I want to say, right around 9 bricks or 9 Play-Doh. The second one was, I think, 10.3, and the third one was 11.7. And my pre-boil target was somewhere around 11.5, 11.7. But when I got to the end, my numbers were right on for a 12.2 Play-Doh beer. So I think these readings came in a little bit high. But I'll dial them in over time. But I really agree with the concept. I'm running the induction burner at about 2,000 watts. You can see that 2,000 on the front of it. I could run it higher, but I've just kind of been taught to stay away from everything being full volume. But maybe in this case, being a decoction, it'd be okay just to roast it up. Here's where I'm seeing the bubble. Trying to just lift the bag to release it, but it just seems like it's not wanting to go away. So I think just leaving the mash cap in place is probably going to be the best approach. You can see it's pretty dry down there. It's not, definitely not a complete underwater boiled mash. I mean, it's trying to emulate a normal decoction. I'm going to put the cap back in place. One thing I don't like about having the cap in place is a lot of the liquid goes over the edge and winds up in the center of the cap. But that's just how it has to be. You'll see when I take it out. There's some going over right now. And I did turn the burner down, so I'll need to experiment over time with low or high temperatures. Okay, so the decoction boil is complete. And I'm taking the final beta rest reading here, gravity reading, and like I said, it's like 11.7, which is real strong, but I suspect that's maybe a little bit high. But oh, there you go, put it right there. Letting the sample cool a little bit more, trying to even out the temperatures a bit, but it's a work in progress. All right, now we're going to do the transfer. So as you can see, all that liquid wound up on the lid, but this boiling is not about the enzymes in the wort. It's more about boiling the actual grain, so that's probably not that big of a deal. So while I'm rinsing the lid off, I wanted to show the color differential. This is from earlier when I just added the grain bag over to the boil kettle, and just wanted to show you the color comparison. We did get a fair amount darker with that boil, which is a positive. Had some effect. Okay, now it's just the same step in reverse. I'm going to lift the bag out of the boil kettle and introduce it back into the mash. First, we're going to stop the recirculation, drain the extra little bit that's past the clamp. Really enjoyed having these clamps My system's pretty much built around them, and they're great for this kind of stuff because it traps the wort in there, doesn't leak out. You can just start and stop flow very easily. So I'm just going to take this bag and put it in the mash and then submerge the opening of the bag and just basically rotate it under the water and just let the grain fall out under the water line, and then just take the empty bag out. Helps to have gloves on for this, for sure. So I'm just basically walking the grain bag to the bottom. You see the seam right there. The grain just falls right out. Very simple. I bought these gloves at Harbor Freight and really like them for brewing. They were only like $4.50, I think, $4.50. They're easy to take on and off, and they have a little grip stuff on the front edge of them, and they're fine for picking up hot things, hot liquids. They've been really nice brew gloves. Watch out for the kettle. All right, so we're going to put the mash cap back on the mash. And I pulled a little bucket up to put the boil kettle on. I'm going to drain the remaining water/wort out of the decoction boil kettle and introduce it back into the mash. And then we'll start the recirculation going again. All right, open the clamp, adjust the speed of the pump. There we go, put the mash cap back in place, and this will go on until the end of the mash. Although I forgot to stir it, so I'm going to take the mash cap back off and just give it a good stir to distribute the grain that came back from the decoction. Oops. There we go. Now we can put the mash cap back in place and the mash can go all the way to the end. And now we're ramping up to the alpha rest. And I'm just going to go forward in the video. Alright, we've moved forward. The mash out is almost finished here. There we go. So it just wrapped up. We'll turn the foundry off. Unplug it from the wall. Next thing is to shut off the recirculation, close the clamp, and turn off the pump. Drain the wort out of the little tubing on the bottom of the mash cap. And it's just as simple as unhooking the tubing and connecting it to the boil kettle. The nice thing about having the clamp is that nothing will drain out when I move the tubing around. Normally I'd go right into this, but I'm going to move a camera in so we can get a better view of the wort that comes into the kettle. Clear wort out of the mash tun is a goal of mine, and I continue to work on it. Gets better all the time. Okay, we're starting flow right now. Nice clear wort. I believe it's important to leave as much as you can in terms of grain particles and anything else that happens in the mash tun and not transferred over to the boil kettle. One of the results of low oxygen brewing is very light colored wort, and as you can see, even with a single decoction, this wort color is still very light in color, given it is a light grain bill, but still it's very light colored. That's one of the nice things about low oxygen brewing. You can tell if things are oxidized or not just by the color of the wort. I try to keep the flow relatively slow for this process. As with any lautering, you know, you don't want to rush it too much and put any extra pressure on the grain bed. But generally this is about a 15-minute, maybe 20-minute endeavor on my system. It's not too bad. Usually that hose is more of the middle, but I'm trying to keep it open for the view of the kettle for the cameras. Okay, now that the lauter is finished, just going to close the clamps. and start dismantling the mash tun and cleaning it out. While the wort is coming up to boil, I like to totally clean out the mash tun. I use it later on in the brew day as my chilling water receptacle. So I get all the grain out of it, and then I put the hot PBW in it, let it soak for a while, run it through the pump, all that stuff. I'm just lifting the grain out. That's the nice thing about using the brew bag. After I let it drain for a little while, I just transfer it over to the clear bag that the homebrew shop delivers the grain in, and then I just leave it out for the trash. Just going to show a little bit of the wort left at the bottom of the kettle. A little bit of stuff down there, not too bad. You can see if you have a use where you're only using an all-in-one, you're going to do the rest of your boil with all that sediment on your heating element. Checking their pre-boil gravity. Rinsing out the mash tun. Adding the hot water. There's the PBW. And I just drop all the items in there as well. False bottom, mash cap. We can see the boil kettle still doing its thing. We can see some foam. I usually take the mash cap off around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so we're pretty much at that temperature, so I'm going to take the mash cap off. Pretty happy with that foam. Got a nice white color. I can see a little bit of darker stuff, not too much. This is sort of a guidepost or way to judge how you did in the mash as to how much quote-unquote stuff you have in your pre-boil break. What we're aiming for is bright white foam with really nothing else other than the foam. Yeah, you're going to get protein coagulation, but in general we just want to have the foam. And I'm pretty happy with that with a single decoction. I usually have the induction burner set to 2,000 watts to come up to temperature. Normally I would have the lid on the whole time with the quarter bit cut out, but for the video I'm just leaving it open so we can see the foam. I just added a little lactic acid in there too. There's a lid. That lid helps you lower the amount of heat you put into the wort. So as you'll notice, when we get to the actual boil, I drop the heater down to 1200 watts. There we go. Before we get too high with the foam, I turn it down to 1200, and there we go. The boil is officially started. Doing a 60-minute boil today. You see the first large raft of protein and stuff that I usually scoop out a little bit if it's large, big chunks. At this point in time, I do not know if this step is a positive, a negative, or a neutral, but I do it. Alright, so for the rest of the boil, we'll just leave this lid on, and that helps hold the heat in but let the steam escape. Alright, next I want to show what I do to sanitize my fermenter and also the receiving keg that this beer will be served out of. I've moved to doing everything here on the brew day, which is nice and convenient. And that allows me to then hook up that keg for the fermentation gas purging during fermentation. And it's already sanitized and ready to receive your beer. So I'm just going to put X amount of water into the fermenter first, and then drop some sanitizer in there, and then put the rest of the water in there, and then I will proceed to push it out of the fermenter into the keg, fill up the keg, and then go out of the keg into the bucket with the sanitizer. For this use, I use an iodine-based sanitizer. I like that it doesn't create any foam, and it's also less expensive than Star San. Okay, we're ready for our one and only hop addition. For this recipe, I'm going with a single addition of Perle at 45 minutes. There we go, nice and easy. Another step I always do is run some boiling wort through the drain of the kettle, and I just add it right back into the boil. And this is a way to just kind of sanitize that extra little bit. It's kind of more important on low IBU beers, but I think it's still it's an area that you can maybe forget about because you really don't run anything through there once you start your boil. So I just run 2 of these little pitchers through. Notice all that condensation on the lid. I try to keep that out of the kettle when I move the lid around. When I made the lid, I tried to make it a little bit domed so some of it kind of goes all the way to the edge and not fall down in the kettle. I think it sort of works. You can see we have a big raft of protein sitting in there. And I moved that around to get all the hot material away from it, and then I eventually removed it. Okay, back to the sanitization of the vessels. I realized that I hadn't screwed the post on my keg. I'm going to set those up. I've got a little air pump that I'm going to hook up to just start the flow. Once it goes for a while, it creates a siphon and it'll finish the job slowly. But to start it off, it needs a little help. This is normally something you can just set and forget. And none of this is sealed or under pressure or anything. You know, both of these vessels are going to be opened up after they've been sanitized. So it's just something to do the sanitizing, but it's not like the very, very final step. A little closer view of the keg. I leave the pressure relief valve open, let it fill completely through there, then I close it. Then the transfer continues out of the gas post into the bucket. Went by quickly. So then after this is complete, I'm left with a bucket of sanitizer, which is handy to have around to put any hoses or the top part of the fermenter back in. And as you see, I also put my chiller in there before I put it in the boil kettle. As you can see, we have a land mass floating around in the boil kettle. But it is what it is. Okay, so here's another step just for this beer style. I'm going to add something called Sauergut. And this is a traditional way to acidify either your mash or your boil. I made this. And it's got a certain amount of lactic acid content, but it also has a little flavor. So we like to add it in the boil with about 15 minutes left. So I just run it through a little strainer to keep the grain particles out of the boil. So I just pour it in. I also added some lactic acid before this. I'm shooting for a goal of around pH 5.1 at the end of the boil. Now I'm filling up the chiller water. That's my reservoir for the immersion chiller. Use the same pump, so it's real convenient. Here's the chiller and the stir motor. Almost finished with the boil now. Also added a Whirlfloc tablet. Okay, the boil is complete now. I'm turning off the immersion chiller, take the lid off, keep that condensation away. I'm going to add the immersion chiller as well as the electric stir arm. I have a chiller within a chiller. If you want more information on that, I have another video about my setup that I did. Goes into some more detail on it. I'm always working on speeding up the chilling process. I'm in Texas, so it's kind of a challenge at times. This system is working pretty well, but I'm always experimenting, trying to improve it. I've got a little power supply here that converts the AC to DC and runs the motor. almost ready to start the groundwater flow. I start with just the water out of the hose bib side of the house. I think today it was reading about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So that helps me determine when I'm going to transition away from the groundwater to either chilled water or ice or both. So I just set the hose in there on a constant flow, and I can adjust its flow amount once I start. I just realized I hooked that hose up in a weird spot. I'm gonna hurry up and change it before we get going. Alright, no more kinks. Alright, so now we'll start the flow. And what I like to do is take the early bits from the chilling and pour it right back into my hot liquor tank since it's already warm, and I use that for the cleanup water. The stir motor barely fits inside the small chiller, so sometimes it's kind of a challenge to get it to not scrape. But usually take the, I don't know, 3-4 buckets, maybe 5. I don't fill them all the way just so I don't have to lift 5 gallons up to the hot liquor tank, but I usually put about 8 or so gallons in the hot liquor tank. And if the groundwater is cool enough, and that's usually right about the time, then I'll switch to the chilled or just straight to ice for the water. Trying to be pretty careful with the first pour here because it might just splash out down into the wort. But Always searching for a better way. It seems like it takes too long. I do enjoy the immersion chiller though. It leaves everything in the kettle. It just depends on where you live, what's best. I know a lot of people use counterflow chillers that live more in the northern part of the country, and they have much cooler groundwater. That works great for them. I don't know if you can see the thermometer on the front of the kettle. I think we're down to like 100, maybe 110 Fahrenheit right now, so that's not too bad. Now that I have the HLT filled up, I'm going to move to just a straight recirculation. You can see in the boil kettle, the wort is starting to clear up a little more, and the particles are starting to settle a little bit. And we'll let this run until it looks like it's not really having much of an impact, which I found I like to keep about 30 degrees Fahrenheit above the temperature of whatever I am using, either it be groundwater or chilled water or what have you, for it to have an impact. So if we have 60 degree groundwater, it's really gonna probably stop being useful around 90 to 80 Fahrenheit. It'll get down to 80, but it'll start just taking longer and longer to move the thermometer lower, and that's usually when signal would be to move to a colder medium. I keep chilled water in my lager fridge, so sometimes if I'm not doing a really cold fermentation like a normal ale, sometimes I only need some chilled water out of my fridge and it'll get me down to 60, but depends on the time of year. Summertime, obviously, it's a lot more extreme. is over there breaking up the ice that I bought from Twice the Ice. I think it's one 16-pound bag that I use for this beer. I went in the house and got 2 chilled 1-gallon milk jugs. I'm going to add those after I sort of drain some of the recirculated water out, because it's probably at the same temperature as the Wort right now. Once that's almost empty over there, I'll add the fridge water, which is probably about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And then that will set up going to the ice bath. So this is kind of the most difficult range, I think. I'm hovering about 80 degrees right now Fahrenheit, and getting it down to below 50. You know, that range from 80 to 50 seems like it's the most difficult. Takes the most effort. All right, it's time to move to adding the ice. So before I do that, it's very important to take as much water out of the tun as possible, because the ice melts a lot quicker if there's water around it. And what we're really shooting for is the actual melted water from the ice. So basically you want to keep this thing as dry as possible, so to speak, in the tun, because you want just the ice to create its own melted water that you're going to recirculate. And you'll see as I have the ice going, I will continue to take water out of the recirculation stream, because you're just adding warm water back onto the ice, and that makes it disappear even faster at a higher temperature than if it just melted and using its own melted water. That's the coldest. So I'm trying to minimize the amount of water in there before I put the ice in there, while still keeping a recirculation going. I try to keep the return away from the outlet in the bottom of the kettle. And I've been experimenting with actually slowing down the flow of the recirculation at this point. I still don't have a definitive viewpoint if full speed or slower is better at this point. This always works, it just takes time. I'm aiming for about 46 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll ferment around 50, but I like to go under a little ways to make it through the little settling period in the garage, as well as just practice of pitching your yeast a little bit lower than your fermentation temperature, letting it work up to it. When I notice the water level coming up in the ice, that's when I start to take some out. it's definitely a balancing act. You're bringing water that has been warmed inside the chiller back over to the ice, which then speeds up the melting of the ice. So it's definitely a balancing act. And once again, it seems to take forever. I noticed the ice level was going down, and just for the sake of making the video a success, I went and got some more ice from the ice maker in my normal kitchen fridge. Just wanted to augment the ice a little bit, just to make sure. It probably wasn't needed in the end, but can't hurt. Right here I'm putting some sanitizer on the mash cap for the boil kettle, because as it settles after I take out all the chilling equipment, I'll put that mash cap on there, and at this stage it needs to be clean, sanitized. We're at that stage in the chilling where the ice really isn't melting as much anymore because the return water is cooler. which is good, but it still just takes longer than you want it to. Stirring seems to help a lot. All right, one last check. Looks like it's 46, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to call it. I wish it didn't take that long, but it does. Try to keep the water from falling back in the wort. There's the mesh cap. So we're just going to set that on top. Put the lid on it. Add a little sanitizer to the lid first. And we'll let that sit for about 20 to 40 minutes. I think for this beer, I let it sit for 40. Okay, so the settling period is finished. And now I'm going to start to transfer the wort. I have a rotating racking arm inside my kettle. So what I'm doing now is I'm just turning it upwards. When I boil, it's straight down, so I turn it so it's above any kind of tube, and it's just getting clear wort at this point. So I run a little bit off just to get the tubes cleared out and to get to where we're actually running clear. And I will run some into my little sample glass there, Pyrex glass. And I'm also going to run some into my pitcher, which has been sitting in the sanitizer, because I have two bottles of yeast that are straight from the lab. So it helps to have some wort to rinse them. Otherwise, it's tough getting all the cells out of the bottles. So we'll just let that sit for a little bit. Dump the sanitizer out. Oh, once again, never can dump it all out. Seems like it always comes back. All right, so here's just the transfer. Very straightforward. I take the mash cap off because the thermometer sticks out a little bit and the cap can't go all the way to the bottom. You can see there's a lot of gunk around that post for the thermometer in there. I'm going to bring the arm down just a little bit because it was drawing some of that into it. So as the wort level goes down, I sort of follow it with the racking arm. See, we're getting closer to the bottom. And you can see most of the sediment has settled to the bottom of the kettle. And we'll try not to suck very much of it up. Nice, clear, pristine wort going into the fermenter. All right, so we're done with that. Now we're going to aerate. This is an important step for low oxygen brewing. You want to just make sure all the sulfites, if there are any left over, are expended. So basically you're going to use a little more oxygen than normal. And just to ensure that the sulfites will disappear. Some people have had some sulfur flavors come up. So this is kind of a overkill step maybe in some respects, but still good to have extra oxygen around for the yeast. But this is a flow rate of 0.12 liters per minute, which is a pretty slow rate. I'm learning to slow the rate down. If you see a lot of foam, that means a lot of the oxygen isn't going into the liquid, basically just coming right back out of solution into the atmosphere. So it's better to go lower flow rate for longer than a lot of flow in a short amount of time. Like many things during this brew day, slower is often the best way, which is frustrating at times, but it's always the best way. So what I do is do a certain amount of time, 2 to 4 minutes, then I'll let it settle, I'll pitch the yeast, and then I'll put some more oxygen in. I also add some zinc at this stage. For some reason I goosed it up to 0.5 for a little bit there and then brought it back down. Probably just concerned because it's a lager and it needs a lot of oxygen. Getting all the sanitizer off the lid, put that on there, and then we'll push this over to the side. Put in my tilt so I can keep track of the fermentation. First, I'm going to add 1 milliliter of zinc solution. Then I'm going to add the yeast. This is where the pitcher comes in handy. I'm going to pour some wort in there and just slosh it around. Much better. Second vial. Okay, now that that's completed, just push that over a little bit. I'm going to put a little more oxygen in there, but I realized after this brew day, looking at the video, that I never turned the oxygen off, so maybe this is a happy accident. But at this point in time, I'm a week into the fermentation, and we're doing pretty well. We're at 1020, 1019, 7 days into it, so that's not too bad with 15 psi of pressure. Okay, here's the wort I collected. Nice bright color. Happy with that clarity. Got a few floating bits, but after 40 minutes of settling, I think that's pretty good. Make sure the ring is nice and tight on this, since it will be a pressure ferment. And that'll do it. Off to the fermentation chamber.